Have you wrestled with imposter syndrome, excessive and unsubstantiated self doubt coupled with an uncanny lack of confidence? I'm your host, Betty Danowitz. Listen as I interview highly successful individuals about their experience with this imposter syndrome and how it manifests itself in their lives in this If You Ask Betty podcast series dealing with imposter syndrome. So, hi, Jess. Thanks for being on the podcast.
What up, though, Betty?
I'm so glad to see your face. Sorry if those of you who are listening by audio, you can't see her face, but she's just beautiful. And your smile is infectious. I can't stop smiling because I'm looking at you. But okay, let's start with tell us about you.
Well, I like to say I'm the quintessential big sis. I leverage vulnerability as a tool for forging relationships and being authentic in my work, which means that I show up or try to show up as my full self in most spaces. I recognize now I've started my career in the classroom setting. I was a teacher and worked in school systems doing educational equity work, and have now progressed into state government managing regulation surrounding social equity within the cannabis industry. And I've bopped around from corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion training and development to social equity management within the corporate side in cannabis in Michigan. And so my career has been I like to say I'm a traditional millennial in that sense. I don't last more than 2 years in any job.
Sure.
But I think that the way that I'm able to effectively facilitate change within any role is to be myself and just bring my perspective. I'm also a published author and speaker and call myself a transformation strategist. So I'm really, really good at harnessing moments of change within organization and managing human emotion through that change. Because I show up as myself vulnerably in spaces at all times. So that's a little bit about me and kind of my journey and where I'm at professionally and kind of my values personally.
Mm-hmm. And you live those beautifully, by the way. I'm not really supposed to comment at this point, but I just can't help it because your light just shines so beautifully. And guys, she's not kidding. She shows up as who she is. Like what you see is what you get, and you're in for a treat. What would you say are your biggest accomplishments in life and in work? You've mentioned a couple, but what else would you say?
So it's funny because I've recently started reflecting on my entire life journey and what has prepared me for this moment. So I'm a side hustle bandit, right? Like most millennials, not only do I switch jobs every 2 years, I got like 17 jobs at a time, right? I'm doing so many different consulting gigs or whatever projects, creative projects I'm working on, in addition to like managing social media and trying to be this like influencer person. And so when I think about like who I am today, and then I reflect on who I was when I was 16 years old in high school with a 4.3 GPA, leading 7 clubs. I was the leader of 7 clubs, on top of working 3 jobs. I'm like, oh, you've been doing this since you were a child. Like, this is who you are. And so I think just being able to sustain the stamina to pursue whatever I'm interested in, the stamina and courage, right? Like, it takes a lot of courage to say, hey, I got a job offer in Minnesota. My wife isn't going to have a job. Fuck it. I'm going to move to Minnesota from Michigan and just take this job because it's a great opportunity for my career, right? So one thing that I'm really proud of myself is my courage and my stamina, my go-get-itness, my grit. I am also a legacy Detroiter, and I think I get that from Detroit's culture. We are a grind culture city. I also have I've beaten every stereotype against me, right? Like I come from a single parent household, grew up in poverty in Detroit. I'm Detroit public school educated, where the indicators of success are very like statistically low, right? So on top of that, I've been able to go to some of the most elite and prestigious public institutions in the nation. I've attained 3 degrees. I work in a highly regulated industry in a very competitive field. So all of the like professional indicators of success I can check those boxes, and that's something that I'm also really proud of. Like, and some of my friends will be like, Jess got 3 degrees. And I'm like, yeah, and I did that, I did that, and I
Yeah.
got the debt to prove it. And that personally, I think I'm really, really proud of my resilience. I've grappled with clinical depression since I was 16. That's when I also had my first suicide attempt. And like most people, I've had so many traumatic life and adverse life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able to not only manage the PTSD revolving those experiences, but still succeed and thrive. And so I think, and the way that I've been able to succeed and thrive is by leveraging resources to support me through that. Really being able to identify what resources I need, being honest about myself and where I'm at in my journey, and recognizing like, hey, you're probably burnt out right now, Miss 17 side hustle girl. You need to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
And or being like, hey, you don't have control of your mind right now. You might need to increase whatever you might need to increase the hormones coming into your body, the chemicals coming into your body, so that your brain is functioning better. And just being honest and vulnerable about what I need, and going after that and prioritizing that. So I would say those are probably my 3 biggest points of pride: is my ability to
Yeah.
break all the odds, to achieve professional success, whatever that is, and then to prioritize my well-being, even in the face of trauma and struggle.
We're so glad, Jess, that you're here and that you're making the impact that you are, because you really are. You're making a huge impact with everyone that you meet. I just know it because you've impacted me, and we've known each other for a few years and only gotten to spend just a little bit of time together, but definitely making an impact. If I were to ask this question to others, if I were to say, tell us about Jess, what would other people say about you? I said something, but what else?
The main thing is, people tell me this all the time. I think the main thing people tell me about myself is that I'm inspirational,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're able to learn about themselves through my story sharing, because I try to be very vulnerable and honest about where I am. When I had a breakdown in February and ended up in the psych ward for 10 days, most people don't share that publicly, but when I made a YouTube video about it, right? Like, I wanted to share what my experience was like. And from that video, I had so many people message me like, I've always felt like I needed to check myself in, but I never did. So I appreciate you sharing what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a psych world visit, and I've never been able to talk about it or share it with people because I have so much shame around it. And I think that that's why I am so inspiring, is because I help people to release the shame that they have about themselves, because we're all just human, and we're all just navigating this world as best that we can, when the world really wasn't designed for us, specifically women in leadership, right? Like, none of these
That's for
spaces
sure.
were really designed for us. And so when we think about, specifically, if you're even like think of, if you're a single mom in corporate settings, having to navigate childcare and a professional career and compete with someone who doesn't have those issues, like, of course you're going to be doubting yourself and second guessing yourself, because the system wasn't designed to fit you in it. And so the more that I can humanize myself and my experience, allows others to humanize and allow grace for themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what people see in me most. I also I'm a Cancer sun, but I'm a Virgo rising and Taurus moon, which gives me a lot of earth sign energy. So I'm pretty structured. I like a lot of structure, and a lot of people say that I'm organized and structured, and that's what I provide a lot of my friends, is I help them to like really think strategically about how they get things done, and help them to streamline those things,
Mm-hmm.
in a systematic approach. And so I think that those are the ways that I add value. And I'm a strong I hate this actually, because it's a microaggression, but literally anybody who ever hears me speak is like, you're so articulate. And I'm like, of course I'm articulate. I have 3 degrees. Didn't you hear me? But you're just saying that because you second guess my ability because I'm a Black woman, but I am a fluent speaker. I think that I'm able to find points that resonate with people, which allows me to be inspirational. And then my word choice is artful, so folks are more likely to listen to me. And so, yeah, I think that's how people. I'm a strong communicator. I got a lot of structure, and I'm inspirational.
Yeah, and you're wicked smart.
You're so affirmational, Betty. I feel like I'm in a therapy session. Tell me
you are. You you really are. You're wicked smart, and I think that's part of why you're so fluent, because you're thinking so clearly about what it is that you're talking about, and it just comes out. And people really appreciate that, because I think like myself included, many of us, we have questions, but the reason we don't know the answer is because we can't think clearly enough about it. So then you open your mouth and you're like, well, it's easy, dummy. Here you go. And you never say dummy, but like, you know what I mean? Like it's that kind of clear message that comes across, and it makes people feel better.
Yeah.
You make people feel better.
I think that, so what you're, because when I've not experienced anxiety at the level that I experienced it this year. And so my brain was in this loop of like constantly second guessing everything. And so that lack of clarity, specifically in your speech,
yes,
I would say is a result of imposter syndrome, because your brain is constantly causing you to second guess yourself right before the words come out. So you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to put your foot in your mouth. You don't know if you're correct. Whereas my strength, I said, I'm courageous. I don't give a fuck. I'm a mess up. Like I've established myself as a human, and I let people know I'm not perfect, like just in my brand. So if I say the wrong thing, I know how to navigate messing. And I do DEI, right? Like the premise of DEI is that we have to have tolerance to understanding our own bias and being corrected in that. And so if I can't model that for folks, then I'm not an effective facilitator. And so I think that my strength and fluency to that point is that I don't allow my intrusive thoughts, which they do exist. And when I was unmedicated and in crisis mode in February, they took over. But I don't let them impede who I am, because at the end of the day, I recognize that, like, first of all, my intrusive thoughts are not always telling the truth. They're lying to me. And then second of all, I'm human. So if I mess up and say the wrong thing, then someone in the room who corrects me, thank you for giving me this moment of growth, for giving me this opportunity and this feedback. I appreciate it. You know, like, let's grow together. And so I don't hold on to like having to be perfect. And I think that is where imposter syndrome expects you to be perfect, because
it does.
If you're not perfect, you're a fraud, right? That means you don't belong there.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about more of that in just a minute, but I do want to take a second to plug that if you are loving listening to Jess Jackson talk and you want to hear some more, we did do an episode on the If You Ask Betty podcast. You and I talked about, I think it was something DE&I related. It's been a minute, so I can't really remember. But the good news is that it's in the episode log. So if you go and you search If You Ask Betty Jess Jackson, you'll be able to find that conversation. And I'm pretty sure that was one where you allowed me, you created an environment where I was able to be vulnerable and say, listen, I'm going to put my very whiteness on the line here and be like, I don't know the right words to say, so I'm afraid to say them. And I remember that conversation, and it was so powerful for me and powerful for those listening. So check that out. Okay, Jess, what has been your experience with imposter syndrome? Tell us about that.
And this is where I want to get into the intersection of imposter syndrome and identity, right? So we talked about being women, and I don't want to say that imposter syndrome doesn't affect men, because there are lots of men who navigate imposter syndrome as well. But I think that women navigate it differently in the way that it affects our performance and our ability to like execute on it. Although maybe author needs to research that, right? Because maybe men are navigating imposter syndrome in a different way.
Yes.
But I would say that the root of my imposter syndrome is really related to my racial identity, right? Specific, like I said, folks are constantly telling me that I'm articulate, right? Which at some point I'm like, yeah, okay, I hear that, right? Like I can speak well. That is a part of my strength. I can see how sometimes my communication skills are different. I'm differently skilled than other people in that. But also the root of that compliment is the assumption that I wouldn't be able to effectively communicate myself in a way that folks can understand and follow along, which oftentimes is rooted in racial bias, right? Our expectations of performance of people of color is coded by years of bias in all of our systems. And so the way that I've experienced imposter syndrome has really been rooted in my understanding of my racial identity being from Detroit, which has stereotypical low performance indicators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure
specifically where
does.
it came out the most was when I was on the campus at the University of Michigan in 2000, from 2005 to 2009. In 2006, Michigan's Supreme Court overturned affirmative action. So a lot of and it was rooted in a case from admissions at the University of Michigan. And I was, a Black girl from Detroit, from a single parent, low income household who likely got into the University of Michigan because of affirmative action, right? And here I am on campus listening to all of this rhetoric and all this propaganda around how affirmative action recipients didn't deserve their place on this campus, right? And so as a student, I was questioning whether or not I deserved, right? Because who the fuck deserves education, right? Like everybody deserves education, but whether or not I deserved my place at the University of Michigan. And at the same time, feeling like I didn't want to be who I was there. I didn't want people to question my merit, right? Like I didn't want to express that I was from Detroit, that I didn't want people to see me as a Black woman. I didn't want them to just, hey, that's that girl that got in from affirmative action, where I had to constantly validate why I was there, right? And on top of that, Michigan was hard. And so I was struggling academically. For the first, I told you I was a 4.3 GPA with 7 clubs and 3 jobs. That means that I was high performing with a lot of capacity. And when I was at the University of Michigan, I was struggling academically and only had 1 job. And I was like, I can't keep up. I'm struggling academically because, rigor is a real thing.
It is.
And now I'm questioning whether or not I deserved my spot because I'm struggling academically. And it kind of got a hold of me. I checked out. I stopped going to class because I didn't want to be viewed as I couldn't keep up with the reading, right? Like we would have to read hundreds of pages a night.
Hundreds of pages.
And I was like, what the I haven't read this much. First of all, I got a 4.3 without even reading, if I'm being honest. Like my high school years, I was just coasting and still was all A student. And so I just, that was probably the most severe experience I had with imposter syndrome, because I was navigating these institutions and structures and rhetoric and propaganda that was telling me I didn't belong there. And then my experience was like, hey, this is the first time I'm actually struggling in school. So is this true? It's mirroring that narrative, right? And so I hadn't, while I was a student, I didn't really process what was going on until I did more work in educational equity and understanding community and belonging on campuses and mental health, and how mental health affects performance, student performance, and student achievement. And so that's probably my most severe experience with imposter syndrome. But I think I navigate imposter syndrome pretty much in every professional space that I enter, especially if I'm the only person of color in the room. Because one, I'm going to be like, oh, do I have to speak on behalf of every person of color now? Or, is this person only going to want to connect with me because I do DEI work. So my scope of work is around these topics, right? So people want to talk to me because I'm a thought leader around DEI, which I'm like, okay, great. This is my but sometimes I don't want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. White people won't be at lunch. Like, this is a trauma place in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to talk about the same things you want to talk. Let's talk about the beach. Let's talk about Wheeling, let's talk about Lake Michigan. And so it's like constantly like questioning my place and whether or not I belong at the table, and reminding myself that like I do.
Yeah. Did you ever see My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Great movie. And what I
Windex.
didn't know, what Windex? Yeah, just put some Windex on it.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize at the time that I was watching it, because it was really a movie. A lot of her experience is about belonging. Like her entire life, she doesn't even feel like she belongs in her family.
Yep.
And I remember the scene where she's thinking back when she was a kid and she would go to school and she would sit down at lunch and there would be all the blonde girls with their little white bread sandwiches and she would have leftover moussaka, which is actually really delicious. Like, what an amazing thing for a kid to have for lunch. But the kids, of course, the other kids are probably making fun of her because she's not like them.
Yep.
You know, she's Greek. And then you fast forward and she goes to community college and she sits down with all the blonde girls and she pulls out her white bread sandwich and she finally feels like she belongs because she actually feels like one of them versus them accepting her. And like, I
Yep.
just think about, it just made me think of that when you're talking about, I don't want to sit down with all you white people at lunch and talk about DEI. I want to talk about the beach. And like, it's that kind of thing. Like, you kind of grown to the point where you're like, I don't need that white bread sandwich. I'm going to eat what I eat. You eat what you eat. And like, let's just be humans together. And I love that about you. I love that. That comes up in our conversation so much. I mean, we're both from the Detroit area. You live in Detroit proper.
Yep.
I worked in Detroit proper for a long time. And we both have sort of that Detroit grit, but we also have had very different experiences
Mm-hmm.
in living literally within 10 miles of each other, probably most of our life.
Right.
So I love, that's why I love to sit at the table with you and have a conversation. And we don't have to talk about DEI ever if you don't want to.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And it'll come
Yeah,
up organically because I'm me,
it
but you
it
never have
does.
to ask me about it. You know,
Yes,
we can start our
it'll
conversation
just
where
show
we're
up.
at.
Yeah. It'll
Yeah.
just show up. Exactly. So, okay. So I'm assuming, well, thank you for that story, by the way, of you in college. It's a beautiful explanation around imposter syndrome, both because you are having outside forces and inside forces kind of making you feel that. I'm assuming you still have this. This still happens to you. So when you're having an episode of imposter syndrome, how does it manifest itself? So you talked a little bit earlier about perfectionism. It sounds like you've done a lot to kind of really work on that. Some people say it's overachieving, self-sabotage. Like, what is it that you experience? Like, what happens?
Yeah, I think that the first thing and right now, I just transitioned into a regulatory role in the government, right? Which means
Mm-hmm.
that I am responsible for implementing the rules and laws that the state legislator have in place. And I'm the enforcer, right? I'm the regulator.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that in order to do my job, I have to read 500 pages of statutes, right?
Ooh,
And
I
laws
thought
and
you,
legal.
wait, hold on a minute. I thought you said that there would be no reading. Oh no,
No,
wait, that was we already did a lot of reading. Okay, sorry. I'm back.
yeah,
Sorry.
Michigan prepared me for life.
That sure did. It sure did.
Apparently. But in order to like do my job, I have to read, and I have to read for detail, right? To find
Mm.
out, because my scope, the scope of my work is scattered throughout this whole
You have to find it. Yeah.
chapter 63. Actually, chapter 121 is the one after it's been revised after after the legislative session, right? And so I've had to like find my scatter place job throughout this statute to build out the vision for my division. Apparently, I'm a division lead, which I had no
Look at
idea when
you.
I took that job.
Hmm.
Yeah, I got a staff that I'm hiring, all of these things. But because I'm not fluent in legalese, and because I haven't been engaging with these laws for as long as folks in my office, that's the first thing that's triggering to me and makes me feel
Mm-hmm.
like I don't belong there. And so the way that shows up is I'm silent. I am more observant. I don't contribute as much. And even when I make contributions, I let everybody else speak and I try to interject myself. I interject myself very softly. I'm not very
Mm.
assertive. Everything that I interject is more of a suggestion, a maybe. When I am on the executive leadership team for our office, our agency. And so when I started noticing how my voice is impacted, right? My voice is impacted by this self-doubt. I started challenging myself. So the way that I kind of get through that is I remind myself of why I'm at the table. And while maybe I don't know the statute, as well as everyone in my office who went through the legislative session to advocate for these changes and essentially wrote them, right? So yes, they
Right.
know it better than me. I know the cannabis industry
I,
better than anyone in my office.
I feel imposter syndrome for you right now, just so you know. Like that moment of sitting in a room with people that you know built this project that they've now handed to you, and they're like, okay, make it better. And you're like, okay. Do you have to all stare at me at the same time? Like, yes, I feel it for you. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I
it
just
is.
wanted you to know
It's
I
that
was
way.
feeling it.
That's what the deer in the headlights look, where you're like,
Yes. Uh-huh.
what am I supposed to say? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. When you do know what you do, and that's why you were hired. Like, you've
Right.
shown throughout your interview process, which was months, right? Like, I applied for this job in February, got an offer in May.
Yeah.
I've obviously prepared for this job. I have so much industry experience across cannabis. I am that girl. Well, like, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that to go. I am meant to be here. I am meant to be. So the way that I overcome that is through that self-talk, to be like, girl, snap out of it. Like, you are meant to be here. Show them what you know. Challenge them from your real lived experience. They know the
Yes.
laws. They know the theory. Do they know the
Mm-hmm.
practical? How do you marry the two? Show up. And I just like remind myself of that. And I've noticed over the last couple. So then I also spend the working extra hard overtime. That's a
Mm-hmm.
real
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? So that means that I'm in meetings all day because we just opened licensure. The pre-approval process for our social equity verification process opened Monday, which meant
Mm.
we had to build out all of the infrastructure. So I'm in back-to-back meetings all day. So I go home and read this and highlight and print it out and label it and make sure, so I have all of these things. But it's the overworking that
Yeah.
is like to make sure that you are ready or that you feel ready. So it shows up for me. I violate a lot of my own personal boundaries.
Mm.
My life becomes revolving around work. I don't do a lot of, I notice I drink a lot more coffee, right? Like I'm on my third cup today and it's 4 o'clock. Why am I drinking a cup of coffee at 4 o'clock when I know that caffeine dehydrates me and doesn't work well with my body, right? I
Mm-hmm.
stop doing all of the things that are best for me, right? Like I'm not necessarily working out as much. I'm not moving my body as much. I'm not, and I start to go back to some of my disassociative coping mechanisms. I oversleep, I overeat and binge eat. I shop compulsively, right? Like anything to take my mind off of the
Mm-hmm.
stressor that's showing me that I don't belong or I'm not worthy. And shopping is probably one of my worst habits because it's like I can buy a pretty shiny thing to take my mind off the fact that I don't feel good enough to do this,
Yeah.
and when I can look pretty, and that's which, sometimes I look pretty and it makes me feel better in the
It
workplace.
does.
I'm not
It
gonna lie.
does.
But also the budget. I'm managing 2 households and just moved across, multiple state lines. I need to chill on spending money. Um, but yeah, those are the ways that it shows up for me. It also, I sometimes can't. It feels a lot like anxiety, I guess. That like sometimes it's like heart palpitations. It's
Mm-hmm.
like breath. I'm sweating a little bit more, and so I just have to like focus on my breath and really checking my intrusive thoughts and being like, "Yo,
Yep.
shut up. That's not true. You belong here." So another way that imposter syndrome shows up in my current role right now is through community engagement as a community resource and a community leader. Um, I'm leading a reinvestment program into communities in Minnesota, which I know absolutely nothing about, right? I am a new resident to Minnesota. I am from Detroit, and I'm leading a community reinvestment grant that will reach $15 million by year 3. And so I have to go and be the face of this program, of this community reinvestment program, to communities that have been here long withstanding, right? And I'm a newcomer. And I think that it is really hard to be in the face of community and share out, these are the resources that we're creating, when I haven't been a part of or engaged
Yeah.
with community. And
Yeah.
so That makes me all the time question whether or not I need to be in the room, if I need to be. So I'm always like second guessing myself, right? Which is how imposter syndrome comes up for me. But today, and this is why you got to like challenge your intrusive thoughts, not only with like your affirmations, right? Like shutting them up at the door, popping the bubble and all of those things, but also with your receipts, because I've been leading cannabis justice work for the last 5 years. And I've done expungement, and I'm on the board of a foundation which puts money on the books for folks who are federally incarcerated for cannabis convictions. And one of our community advocates who's seeking to outreach to me, which comes with the anxiety. I'm like, okay, this is a new advocate who's been doing work in Minnesota for 20 years and all of these things, sends me over like, this is what I'm interested in. And I just name it. I was like, I've been doing expungement work in this way. I've been putting money on the books in this way. And he sends me a list of prisoners that he's engaging with. And I was like, yep, my board, I've given money to this person in February. We've given money to this person in June. So we're interacting with the same federally. And so I have been doing the work. And I have literal receipts. Now this person is excited to meet me and wants to meet me because of the work that I've been doing at scale in Michigan to support, so that they can learn from me. So not only am I able to learn from this community advocate, which is what any leader needs to do anyway. You don't come in and tell people how you want to make change. You have to listen to what people want change, right? Like that's what a leader does. But I also am able to bring experience and expertise from the work that I've been doing in other places to support their work here. And so that is a literal receipt that challenges those intrusive thoughts that tell me I'm not supposed to be here. And so I lean on that a lot to kind of check them.
I love that you call them receipts, because when you first said receipts, I was like, well, she was talking about shopping. She was talking about she probably shops way too much. And there's not, if you're looking for me to tell you to stop that, you are talking to the wrong person. Because if you ever need someone to talk you down from buying something, don't call me. So I'll be like, girl, buy that. You should buy that. I have several coach purses that, prove that I have no willpower when it comes to that. So
don't we both drive Jeeps?
I did for a while. I've switched to a truck, but yes, I did. And I bought it in COVID because I was sad. That was why I bought it. So so I get all of that, right? And it makes sense. But let me ask you this question. Has anybody ever said to you, Jess, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never lived in XYZ neighborhood?
No.
So no one's ever actually said that. But there is a real fear, and I would feel it for you. Like, I feel it too. Like, there's a real thing where you feel like, I'm not qualified because I don't know enough about this small thing, even though the amount of knowledge you have that supersedes that astronomically. Like, I think that happens to a lot of us, right? Is we make ourselves feel small over this tiny detail that all we have to do is ask. And I think people actually would appreciate that. And I just wanted to ask that because maybe someone had, right? And tell me who they are, because I will. That was my sound of my fist hitting my hand, folks. Like, I'll get them. But like, a lot of times we have those thoughts, and that is actually an intrusive thought because it will stop you dead in your tracks when really there's no evidence at all that anybody is thinking that. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying nobody's saying it to you. Right.
No one says it directly.
Yeah.
And I think that remember we talked about intersection of identity.
Yeah.
Here are the things that I access a lot of privilege because of the way that I speak, because of my education levels. So even when we think about who's like the job that I received, right, it could go to a community advocate in Minnesota who's been doing this work for decades. But one of the biggest barriers up front is education level in order to take this job, right? So like up front, I'm offered a position because my friend told me today, like, Jess, you gentrified Minnesota. Like that was one of the things. And so I'm constantly like questioning not only imposter syndrome, but and I think white folk guilt, right? We talk about white guilt all the time.
Absolutely.
And so I think that the way that we kind of challenge that is naming, like, these are the privileges that I have, right? But here's how I get to better serve you. I am your bridge. I am your mouthpiece. I need to learn from you so that I can translate it to folks that will listen to me. And it is unfortunate that I have to be this mouthpiece because this is how society works. But
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm here for. And I want to, along the way, create opportunities to build you up with me.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is like, I not only part of my imposter syndrome, it's very intersected with racial justice and understanding the ways that my identity gives me access to things in different ways that other folks might not have the same level of
Yeah.
access.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So when you think about the way that imposter syndrome manifests itself in your life, are there other contributing factors? So you talked about overachieving, because you always have like 17 jobs and, 14 things, 75 irons in the fire. I'm right there next to you. I have another fire, my own fire with my own irons, but yes, I'm right there with you. So you talk about that, and you talk about, and I love how you talked about getting quiet, because that is not you. Not that
Mm-mm.
you're, and there's nothing negative about that. It's just your natural personality is what we've been hearing. You're excited, you're enthusiastic, you have a lot to say, you have a lot of thoughts, you have a lot of energy, you have it's seemingly unending stamina. But when you get quiet and sort of reflective, that's definitely a difference in behavior. So when you think about that, are there other contributing factors? So like for some people, there are certain triggers, like being new at a job, being newly evaluated, things like that. But is there something else about you, and you've mentioned a few things already, that you think makes this sort of imposter syndrome phenomenon happen?
Yeah, I think underrepresentation of my identities
Mm.
and being one of the few in the room is one trigger. I also So the new job, the new space, the new community, they're also, and this probably relates to identity, but I know that a lot of it, body image
Mm.
and so I have shown up in my life relatively large for a woman. And regardless of my weight, I'm 6 foot tall and I wear heels.
You
So
tall. Yeah.
yes, I'm a large woman. And so constantly like questioning how I look and how I appear and the amount of space that I'm taking up, though that is and what people are thinking about me, whether it be like what I'm bringing to lunch and what I'm eating and what people see me eating, how I'm dressed, like all of those things contribute to these intrusive thoughts, which cause me anxiety to second guess
Mm-hmm.
myself, which is a
Mm-hmm.
manifestation of that imposter syndrome or that feeling like I don't belong.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that so anytime I feel like I'm underrepresented, whether it be I'm underrepresented because I'm a woman, whether it be I'm underrepresented because I'm a woman of color, whether it be I'm underrepresented because I'm queer, all of those intersecting things, as well as my body size and the space that I take up in that. Anytime there's something new that I don't understand, or it's maybe a new language like legalese that I'm learning right now,
Sure.
like when there's anything new that I've never navigated, and then also when there's like cliques. So like if
Mm.
there are friend groups that are really tight, and have this like long withstanding friendship, and now in professional settings and in professional networks generally, but if I show up to like a networking space and this network seems fully formed, I don't know how to intersect myself and join into the community. And so that shows up in community spaces, in networking events, that's where I really notice the silence. So I can go to a networking event and um, and literally be a wallflower, and not talk to anybody. So I'm often like when I go to new places, because I know that's how I'm gonna be. I don't talk to people. I always take a wing person who is more. I'm also an introvert, so
Mm-hmm.
I always take a wing person who's extroverted and will drag me along, especially if I need to meet people in that space, because I just will get overwhelmed and like not insert myself.
Sure. Sure. Anytime you need a wing woman, I'm there for you.
Join
This
Megan.
yeah, this extrovert will drag you all over the place until you're like, I'm out. um, so okay, I have one more question. And I'm so grateful again, Jess, that you came on and you shared your story, because I think people are listening and going, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. And also, oh my gosh, I want to hear Jess Jackson talk more. So I think they're thinking about this. The last question is why did you want to be a part of this imposter syndrome project?
Yeah, I think that I want to make sure that whenever we talk about imposter syndrome, we're talking about it from an intersectional perspective, right? And acknowledging how identity has a lot to play with how people show up in their imposter syndrome. Specific, because I know that it manifests differently with different groups. There, like one way that my identity, there's a stereotype, there's a trope around Black women who might be passionate, right? Or might be structured. In fact, this happened to me recently. I'm structured, and I was brought on to a team transition project to manage that transition. And I did so in a very structured timeline and deliverable approach, without like, these are the things that need to happen by this date, by this person, with check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was very structured to manage all of those moving parts, and the person who I was managing she was transitioning out of an executive leadership role, and now I'm managing her. She was triggered, and she just used a lot of language that demonstrated bias. For example, demanding, or kind of had this connotation that I was an angry Black woman, right?
Mm-hmm. Like trying to control everything.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. When really, if you read, she even, to be dramatic, had other people read my emails that I sent her to kind of paint me out. And they're like, yo, she's so sweet in here and so affirmative and so kind, and also structured. Like, it's just professional. I was professional. But her response to me was, you're being, aggressive. That was the word you're aggressive. And I was like, this is language that folks use to undermine Black women in leadership all of the time. And that is why Black women are afraid to show up in spaces. Sure. Because anything that we do is taken as an assault. It is viewed as us having an attitude, as us. And sometimes we're just anxious. We're just we have imposter syndrome too. And so when we're quiet or standoffish, it's read as, an attitude and disengaged, and this is how bias in performance evaluations comes out, when really it might be anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. It might be imposter syndrome, and we're not eligible for the same level of grace. So when I think about why my perspective matters to the conversation, I just want to uplift that imposter syndrome not only is rooted in different issues when it relates to identity, but it also plays out differently for folks of color in the workplace. And so how we're reading and interpreting and supporting difference in this issue that we all experience is going to be really important.
Yes. Agreed. Thank you so much, Jess Jackson, for sharing your experience with us and for giving us all of the color. Like, we need it. We need to know and understand the color and the context. And I know that this is like a super tender point for you right now in your career. And I don't think there could have been a better time for us to have this conversation. So I'm so glad that you joined us. And thanks to the listeners. I hope you'll continue with this series to hear more stories about dealing with imposter syndrome. There are so many amazing people that deal with this every day, and sharing their story helps them and you feel less alone. So be sure to follow If You Ask Betty on LinkedIn and YouTube for more episodes and resources, and tell your friends about it. Hit that share button so they too know that they are not alone. Peace out.
Peace out.